In late September of 1945, an 18-year-old Jewish teenager returned home to Debrecen in the east of Hungary. He'd been away for over a year. He pushed open the door of the family shop just down the road from the university. To his surprise, the shelves were partly stocked. Everything was clean and sparkling. He heard muffled voices from the family room next door. He stepped through the entrance, and there on the table was the family menorah that had lit so many Sabbath evenings. All the candles were burning brightly, reflecting on the faces in the room, his mother and 4 of his siblings. He looked again at the menorah. There were 7 candles, and he remembered his mother used to say it was 1 for each child. No longer, though, and neither was his father seated at the head of the table, poised to deliver the Torah reading. His father and 2 of his siblings were gone. And yet, he had survived, not just the past year, but through the anti-Semitism and prejudice he'd known all his life. He remembered his father's voice, reciting those encouraging verses from the book of Psalms. For he will command his angels concerning you, to guard you in all your ways. They will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. The past year flashed before him. Parents, siblings, persecution, the rail car, the camps, and the smell of death. Why me? Why was I chosen to survive? Eliezer stepped out into the street. The buildings all around him were either demolished or badly damaged. In the slightly chilled air with a glimpse of pale sunlight, he realized, though, that this was not the end, and there were more pages to be written. His parents were married in 1926, and Eliezer Cohen was born on the 8th of March 1927. It was his mother Ertelka's 21st birthday, a gift to remember. His father was Samuel Cohen, a strictly observant Jew born in 1898. Samuel's father was a winemaker from Sharash Potok and dearly loved. As a Cohen, part of the Jewish priesthood hierarchy, Samuel, and indeed Eliezer, were not permitted to visit the graveyard where he was buried, so the family arranged for him to be buried by the perimeter wall, and they would climb a ladder just to peer over and view the gravestone. Eliezer, or Lazer as he was known, had 6 siblings. Closest in age was Armin, known as Brumi. Whereas Eliezer was studious, Brumi was more headstrong and often in trouble with his strict father, in particular when he failed to learn his Torah portions, which was often. The boys, especially Eliezer, were fascinated by aircraft, and they would often pedal their bikes across town to visit the local airfield and watch the planes take off and land. Even this was not without some risk, though, since they were sometimes set upon by gangs of local youths who viciously attacked the Jew boys. Eliezer first school was run by the Hungarian government, but was focused on the Torah and taught by Orthodox Jews. This was not where he saw his future, however. Unlike most of his contemporaries, he didn't want to be a tailor or a pastry cook. Eliezer had set his mind on becoming a mechanical engineer. The best school in Debrecen was the Felsher Femiprei Iskola, the upper metalcraft high school. But first approaches by his parents just drew the response, "We don't take Jewish boys." However, Eliezer's exemplary record saved the day, and after repeating an oath to haughty and hungry, he commenced his studies. From the first day, as the only Jewish boy in the school, he was subjected to extremes of abuse and bullying. But at the end of the first semester, he was called to the podium by his teacher, Mr. Sombati, who put his arm around him and told him he was the best student in the class. However, he couldn't be awarded a prize, since he was Jewish. He was even asked to help the other boys, but as he passed between the rows of desks, they would punch and kick him. Following a request from his father Samuel to Mr. Sombati, he was allowed to leave class 5 minutes early each day so that he wouldn't be jostled or pushed down the stairs. Later, the third-year teacher wouldn't allow this, so he hid with the school caretaker until the other boys and their parents had left. In order to complete his studies, Eliezer was required to undergo an apprenticeship with an engineering company. Samuel despaired of this, saying they'd never find a Jewish engineer who kept the Sabbath. It would be much better if he gave up this nonsense and attended a yeshiva in Papa and studied the Torah. Little did he realize that this choice would be the one that ultimately saved his son's life. It was Eliezer's grandmother, a little more on the liberal side of Judaism, who saved the day. She knew of a Jewish engineer with a factory in Debrecen. Mor Preisler was rather elderly and short, with a goatee beard that he greatly prized. According to the practice of the time, Eliezer's father was required to pay for the apprenticeship, although slavery might be a better description. In the summer, Eliezer started work at 6 a.m. and in the winter at 7. He then finished at 9 p.m. All of Preisler's other employees worked just the regular 8 hours, and the work wasn't that typical either. His first task in the morning was to open the shutters in the Preisler house and then to empty the chamber pots from under each of the beds. Mor Preisler was an inventor as well as an engineer and produced equipment especially for the wine trade in the area. This crushing machine was typical of his manufacture, and we can see Eliezer during a later visit to Hungary explaining its workings. Sadly, Mor Preisler and his wife were taken to Auschwitz, where they both died. The war and the anti-Jewish regulations began to take their toll on the Cohn family. The last time Eliezer saw his father was when they went together to the synagogue in the ghetto area. Samuel was conscripted to a labor battalion where he later died, so they never met again. The entrance to the Debrecen ghetto was right by the synagogue, and the site is commemorated to this day with a replica of the wooden fence. Eliezer then became the man of the house and had to make decisions regarding the family's welfare. Debrecen was the site of an important railway depot which supplied the German forces on the Eastern Front following Operation Barbarossa. This meant that there were continued Allied bombing raids on the rail infrastructure, the Americans by day and the British by night from their bases in Italy. Eliezer's sister Sarah was terrified not so much of the aircraft and bombs, but more of the air raid sirens. So the decision was taken to send her to the countryside along with her grandmother to stay with an aunt who was pregnant. There she would be safe. Tragically, this small village was the first one to be overrun by the Germans with the help of the Arrow Cross, the Hungarian Nazi party. Eliezer's mother rushed there to save them, but she was too late. Back in Debrecen, there was a Wehrmacht barracks across the road from the Cohn store, and Etelka got to know some of the officers, one of whom provided her with a pass. It said that Etelka, the voice of a nightingale, and that soldiers would pause outside the shop just to hear her singing. Little Sarah, her grandmother and pregnant aunt, was swiftly sent to Auschwitz, where they were all gassed. Soon the Holocaust nightmare moved from the villages to the city of Debrecen itself. Eliezer, his mother, sisters and brother were expelled from their home and the shop by the militia and marched to a brickworks at Heidrich St. George, about 10 kilometers from Debrecen. These buildings were favoured by the Nazis since they had a roof but no walls, enabling easy surveillance. They walked the entire way, with Eliezer carrying his baby sister. They were abused and even stoned by the residents of the houses they passed by. These included some of Eliezer's former schoolmates. They had few belongings beyond clothes, some jewellery and family photographs. Food was provided in the shape of a tin bath filled with pig fat. As an observant Jewish family, the Cohns chose not to touch this. So at dusk, Eliezer went scavenging around the nearby houses. He came back with a rusty can, and although they had no idea what it contained, the family devoured the contents. Next morning, they were all so ill with diarrhea and fever that they weren't well enough to be put on the train, which was leaving from the nearby train tracks. Those that did board were taken to Auschwitz, and most were murdered in the gas chambers. 24 hours later, however, the family was considered well enough to travel and loaded onto the cattle trucks. As they boarded the wagons, they looked across at the green fields and trees, and as the train pulled out, they caught glimpses of a view which many thought would be their last. This train, however, was the only one that didn't make it to Auschwitz. The mayor of Vienna had become concerned about the filthy state of the city, since all the available labor had been drafted into the military. He therefore requested that this consignment of Jews should be sent there as slave workers. The train then turned around and headed towards Budapest, where it spent the night in a siding. This was Eliezer first visit to the city, although he couldn't see a lot. Eventually, the train rattled into Vienna, and the Cohens, along with several other families, were crammed into a classroom at a girls' school near to the Western Railway station and set to work. After a while, it somehow became known that Eliezer had education in engineering and metalwork. He was therefore sent to the synthetic oil plant at Schwekat, just outside Vienna. This factory, operated to this day by the Austrian oil company OMV, was the target of Allied day and night bombing, along with similar complexes in Hungary, Romania and Czechoslovakia. One night, the air raid siren sounded, and all the slave workers were told to run across the fields to a bomb shelter. Passing close to an orchard, Eliezer reached up and grabbed a pear. Unfortunately, he was spotted by a soldier and dragged off to the guardhouse. Before the iron door of his cell slammed shut, Eliezer, who spoke fluent German, asked the guard what would happen to him. The guard made a gesture like pointing a gun, turned his back and walked away. Early next morning, keys rattled in the lock. A young officer entered the cell and motioned Eliezer to follow him, directing him through a side door and into the crisp early morning air. He was sure he was about to breathe his last. Then Eliezer looked over his shoulder. There was no one there, and he was free. It was, however, a freedom that didn't last very long. Within a couple of weeks, he was taken to Sendana on the Hungarian, Austrian and Yugoslav border. They were to build ramparts and tank traps. After that, on their way to Mauthausen concentration camp, came one of Eliezer's most frightening experiences. Near to Eisenerz, a picturesque village in the hills around 100 kilometers from Graz, the prisoners were instructed to link arms in groups of 5 and walk up a small hill. A German machine gun nest at the top then used them for target practice, killing 2 or 3 from each group. It was raining at the time, and a river of blood mingled with the water in the gutters. As Eliezer, his brother Brumi, and 3 of their friends linked arms and started on the road, the shooting stopped and did not resume until they were over the rise and clear away. Did the machine gun jam? Was it time for a break? We'll never know. We just know that they all survived. Eliezer's arrival at Mauthausen was a foretaste of things to come. As his group entered the camp courtyard, they were beaten with sticks and clubs by Ukrainian guards. The camp not only housed Jews working in the infamous quarries, there was also a whole tent encampment of Polish POWs. And this wasn't to be Eliezer's only experience of camp life. As the Soviets started to sweep across Europe, the Germans decided to evacuate a number of camps. Many of the inmates of Mauthausen were taken on what was described as a death march to other facilities. And as if the deprivations and starvation along the way were not enough, their guards engaged in random and pointless killings. The destination for the group turned out to be Gunskirchen near to Wels in Austria. The camp was concealed in a forest and, unknown to the prisoners, was built on an ammunition dump. The idea being that, if necessary, it could be detonated easily to hide the evidence. However, their captors never got a chance for that, since the camp was liberated on the 5th of May 1945 by soldiers of the American 71st Infantry. What awaited the GIs was a scene of unimaginable horror, with bodies strewn amongst the trees. The camp housed around 15,000 Hungarian Jews that had been marched from Mauthausen and the surrounding camps. Plus, there were also some 400 political prisoners. Starvation and disease, including typhus and dysentery, were rampant. All that remains of the site today are a couple of memorials set on the edge of the forest. Realizing that freedom had come at last, those prisoners that were able started to stumble and limp towards the nearby town of Wels. When the citizens saw them, many took them in and gave them food and drink. This turned out to be a big mistake, since they hadn't eaten properly for months, and in many cases their stomachs had shrunk. The food therefore caused severe pain and ruptures. Eliezer recognized the danger, but headstrong Brumi wouldn't heed his warnings. He tucked into cheese, ham and bread and paid the price. In agony, he was taken to a US Army medical facility where he died. He's buried in Wels and is commemorated by this plaque and memorial. Having dealt with this devastating loss of his brother, Eliezer set off for Debrecen and home, not knowing what awaited him. The journey was difficult since many railway lines had been blown up by the retreating Germans. On the way through Austria, he arrived in St. Pölten, hoping to board a train for Budapest. While passing by a bar, he was almost shot by a drunken American sergeant, who mistook him for a German due to the old military greatcoat he was wearing. Fortunately, the sergeant fell over before he could pull the trigger. Eliezer's second visit to Budapest was as devastating as the first, with destruction all around. Eventually, he found a train for Debrecen. Finally back at home, Eliezer took stock of his situation. He knew that his father Samuel, brother Brumi, and sister Sarah were dead. But Etaka, with some help from the nearby Russian garrison, had cleaned, repaired and reopened the shop. She was to sell it in 1948 and left illegally for Israel in 1949 with 3 of the children, Sipora, Herman and Miriam. Eliezer was more wary of the Soviets and sensed the beginnings of another authoritarian regime. He decided to escape to Israel at the earliest opportunity. In order to start the journey, it was necessary to contact one of the Haganah groups operating in Hungary. They were responsible for facilitating the escape of Jews and had built up transport and support networks. The group that helped him is believed to have been located in Miskolc, not far from Debrecen. The first leg was in the back of a lorry by night from Hungary to the Romanian border. Fortunately, the group crossed silently and without incident. Then came a long and arduous train journey through Transylvania until they reached the Romanian capital, Bucharest. After spending some nights in the city at number 20 Rome Street, they were told of a boat which had sunk on the Danube, was recovered and hastily repaired for the crossing to Israel. It was originally called the SS Constanza, although other reports and even some painting on the ship suggest it could at one time also have been called the SS Smyrna. It would be the first and the last refugee ship to leave Constanza due to the changing sympathies of the Romanian government. The ship had been renamed the SS Max Nordau after a Hungarian Zionist hero, and the captain was Eliezer Armon. Boarding started on the 3rd of May 1946 and the vessel eventually sailed on the 7th. Around 2,800 people boarded the Max Nordau, meaning that not only was it dangerously overloaded, there was barely any room to sit, let alone sleep. The voyage took 5 days, during which the ancient engines somehow kept plodding stubbornly until the Israeli port of Haifa came into sight. Excitement stirred on the decks of the ship. At last, the promised land. Their hopes were dashed, however, on the 13th of May 1946, when a spotter plane flew over the Max Nordau. It was then intercepted by 2 British destroyers, the HMS Jarvis and the HMS Checkers. The ship was forced to heave to, was boarded by Royal Navy sailors, and the passengers forced to spend days in the harbour without respite from the heat and with limited supplies. Relations were not helped by some of the boys shouting "Nazi, Nazi" at their captors. Eventually, they were transferred to shore, but still not to freedom. They found themselves once again in captivity, this time the Atlit detainee camp. Whilst the conditions and treatment were far better than those they had experienced in Europe, there was still the feeling that after all the trials, they had merely swapped one prison for another. At the age of 19, Eliezer was put on bond and went to work in a quarry. It was a typical job during the building of Israel, and the ladies often got involved too. After almost a year, his mechanical skills once again came in useful, and he was transferred to work in an engineering shop. After fighting in the War of Liberation in 1948, he became a pilot for 10 years, fulfilling his boyhood dream and a passion that he maintained for his entire life. He spent more years working as an engineer and then finally started as a driver and motor mechanic working on lorries and buses. He also shared his skills and passion for all things mechanical by teaching at a vocational school. The family was reunited with the arrival of his mother with the children, and we can see the siblings later in life enjoying themselves in Israel. During this time, Eliezer married and had a son and a daughter. He had 8 grandchildren, one of which became a commercial pilot, and 14 great-grandchildren. A large dynasty, but one that could easily have ended before it began. In Debrecen, Eisenherz, Mauthausen, St. Pölten, so many times and places. Those angels from the book of Psalms did an amazing job. After retirement, Eliezer set about helping the old folks. With his handyman skills and his small minibus, he daily provided transport and carried out odd jobs. He also returned yearly to Hungary to attend the synagogue in Debrecen, visit the sites of fond memories in Potok, and spend time with friends. Here we have him delivering the Aaronic blessing in Hebrew in Budapest.
יברכך אדוני וישמרך. יאיר אדוני פניו אליך ויחונקה. יישא אדוני פניו אליך וישם לך שלום.
He died at home in Israel in 2024, and his wife followed him just a week later. Allah Shalom Eliezer, we are proud to have known you.